Wanderers, welcome back. Today, I am bringing you the final and strongest version of the Lungingquake Barbarian build for Diablo 4 Season 8, and trust me, this one is an absolute beast. I've spent countless hours testing, refining, and pushing this setup to the limits, and today, I'm sharing everything that you need to dominate not just the leveling process, but the endgame as well. The perfect skill setup, the right aspects and gear, updated Paragon boards, and the all-new Season 8 synergies to make this version the peak of Barbarian power. So if you're ready to crush Nightmare Dungeons, melt some elites, and blitz through some bosses like never before, you're in the right place. Let's dive into the full build guide and unleash the true fury of the Flamequake Barbarian.
We stand as one, with steel in our hands, and the battle's begun. Through the fire and fury, through the darkened night, we'll battle the bosses, we'll bring forth the light. Across the countryside, my spirit is born. Mobs of hell's creatures, they rise from the ground, but I'm wielding my axe, and I won't back down. In Cliptis Legion, we stand as one, with steel in our hands, and the battle's begun. Through the fire and fury, through the darkened night, we'll battle the bosses, we'll bring forth the light.
Not the best layout map.
In the dungeons deep, where shadows creep, with echoes of warriors' promises to keep. Facing Lilith, I feel the thrill. With one mighty strike, I bend her will. In Cliptis Legion, we stand as one, with steel in our hands, and the battle's begun. Through the fire and fury, through the darkened night, we'll battle the bosses, we'll bring forth the light. Cliptis Legion, hear the battle cry. Together we fight, together we fly. In Cliptis Legion, we're never undone. With our hearts ablaze, we're the fearless ones.
This is just one.
In Cliptis Legion, we stand as one. In Cliptis Legion, we're never undone. With our hearts ablaze, we're the fearless ones.
In a second,
In
this
Cliptis
masterwork
Legion,
isn't done yet.
we stand as
Get the
one.
masterworking done. But like I said, this one normally ends up in a dead end. But we're at. Always dead end somewhere. Yeah, alright, this should open up the boss here. Yeah, okay. Spirit Caller, this is one of everyone's favorite, right? That's the gameplay right there. Before we hop into the skills, we're going to look at the planner here. Now, this is very specific, because I wanted to make sure that this is going to work for everybody. We deleted the endgame version, and we put exactly what I've been running on the live servers. This is going to have only your legendary aspects, so make sure that if you want to look at what uniques we're going to be running, You scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then we have your latest end game video. We're going to have your unique tiers right here. So these are all of the gear that I've found. So as you're going through, look for these pieces of gear. Now, I would highly suggest to start off, at least find the top 2. Those are going to make the biggest difference in terms of how your survivability and how your damage goes. When you go down here, you can check out the different rune combinations for what we were running. I don't want to move outside of just the basic runes inside of the planner itself here. So make sure you go down, check that part out, and then use this planner here. If you have any questions, obviously hit me up in the comments just to let me know so that I can help work you through whatever it is you have about this guide. This video up here will be updating to the video that you're currently watching right now. So if you're just hopping into this build, click right here to look for this video. This will explain the leveling process from level 1 on. We're going to just focus on the end game portion of this. So hopping in here, we're going to go work on your skill tree. So all of your damage is not going to come from Lunging Strike, even though Lunging Strike is going to be your only offensive ability. We're actually going to go all the way down through Combat Lunging Strike. The reason that we're doing this is we're going to be going into this because we want Berserking. Berserking gives you a 25% increased damage and also gives you movement speed. This will allow you to have Berserking up every time that Lunging Strike lands a critical hit. That's going to be super important, and we'll get into that in a little bit, why that's so important. We're going to be running all the way down through Warpath. Lunging Strike and Ground Stomp can overpower. Whenever you overpower, you're going to gain additional damage with that. We're going to go into Ground Stomp, and we're going to come all the way through Strategic Ground Stomp. Ground Stomp will give you vulnerable damage, it will give you Fury, and with Strategic Ground Stomp, it's going to actually reduce the cooldown of our ultimate. Now, the reason that that's so important is that Call of the Ancients, which is going to be the ultimate that we're taking, is super strong. It does a lot more damage than Wrath of the Berserker because it calls its own earthquakes as well. So you gain additional earthquakes. It does increase summoning damage. It's actually a very, very strong option for you to use. So we want to get that up as much as possible. If you get yourself some of the uniques that are listed in the planner, you can actually have a 9.5 second cooldown on your Call of the Ancients. When you use Ground Stomp and you hit at least 2 monsters, you will now have a 0 cooldown on your Call of the Ancients, and it comes right back up. So as you build into this, it's going to be really important that we get the Call of the Ancients to get off of cooldown as fast as possible. We're going to go into Imposing Presence for some more life, Martial Vigor for some damage reduction against elite monsters, Rallying Cry all the way down through Strategic Rallying Cry. Strategic Rallying Cry is going to give you back some Fortify, and Fortify is going to be very important when we get into the boss powers. Just so that we have some additional bleeding damage here, that's going to activate some of the nodes in our Paragon board. We're going to be taking the Toughest Nails and Outburst combo. That's going to give us Thorns, and then those Thorns are going to deal bleeding damage. We're going to take Challenging Shout. That's going to give us increased life. It's also going to give us 40% damage reduction. It's a really big one for staying alive. Belligerence is going to give us some increased damage every time that we use Lunging Strike. Warcry, we're actually going to put 4 points into Warcry, and all the way down through Power Warcry. When there's 6 or more enemies around, we get increased damage from Warcry as well. We're going to go 3 points into Booming Voice for some additional time on our shouts. And then we're going to go 3 points into Guttural Yell. Whenever enemies are affected by our shouts, they're going to deal less damage to us. We're going to be taking 3 points into Pit Fighter here. That's going to give us some increased damage to close enemies and some damage reduction. We're going to go 3 points into Slaying Strikes. This is going to give us increased damage against healthy and injured enemies, which means that anything above 80% life is healthy. Anything below 35% life is going to be considered injured. 3 points into No Mercy. This is going to give us increased critical strike chance. 1 point into Thick Skin so we can unlock a counteroffensive. Whenever our Fortify is more than 50% of our maximum life, we do damage. And we're also going to be taking Defensive Stance. This is going to increase the damage reduction that we have from Fortify already, which is 15%, and then we're going to have a passive life regen from that. As we said, we're going to be taking Call of the Ancients. We're going to max that out all the way down through Supreme Call of the Ancients. This is going to spawn a bunch of Ancients. They're going to give us some Fury back. They're also going to spawn Earthquakes, which, like I said, is going to be incredibly important. And because your Ancients have a summoning tag, they gain all of the benefits from increases to summoning damage. We're going to be going into Duelist. Now, this is going to be a dual wield setup. I know that we could run a two-handed weapon and go with something like heavy-handed. The reason that we're running this setup here is that you want to get Earthquakes out. That is the most damage. The faster we can attack, the more Earthquakes that we get out. So that's why we're going to be running a dual wield setup so that we can attack faster, get more Earthquakes out. we're going to be taking 3 points into Heavy Hitter. Heavy Hitter is going to give us an increase to our ultimate. It's also going to give us an increase to our earthquakes, and it's a multiplier. This is why your Call of the Ancients earthquakes are so strong. We get a gigantic multiplier to our earthquake damage from our ultimates. So you get the ultimate increased damage plus the earthquake increased damage every single time that you call Call of the Ancients. It's incredibly strong. Then we're going to be going 3 points into Wallop. You have to run a one-handed sword and a one-handed mace in order to take advantage of all of the skills inside of this. So make sure that is your combination. Wallop will not work if you don't have a one-handed mace on, so make sure you look for something like that. The Opal Vendor is incredibly strong and buffed this season, so if you need a one-handed mace, just go gamble for it with your Opals and you will absolutely get one right away. For our key passive here, we're going to be taking Unconstrained. This is going to take your Berserking bonus, like we talked about, that has a 25% increase, and make it 60. On top of that, whenever we're below 65% life, we're also going to be Berserking, and we're going to take 30% less physical damage. That's the skill tree. We're going to go over the gear. Now, for this build right here, I'm going to have some uniques on, and remember, go down to the very bottom of the planner in order to find the uniques you're going to be using. There are a lot more that you can use. Some of these I just put on because I needed things like resistances, so you're going to go based on how your character feels. The first item that we're going to look at is going to be the Ugly Bastard Helmet. Now, this is hands down the strongest helmet for barbarians out there. It does a massive amount of damage. What this is going to do, it's going to convert all of your direct damage to fire damage, and then it all gets run through a multiplier. Now, we're going to look at how the earthquakes become fire in just a little bit. That's why, even though it has a Wrath of the Berserker cooldown, you still want to use this. It gives you increased damage reduction, as well as a big boost of some fire damage that gets multiplied, and then that big, gigantic 100% increased damage multiplier on the bottom is super important. For the chest piece, we're going to be running Steadfast Berserker anytime that we deal damage while we're berserking, which is why berserking with Lunging Strike is so important. We're going to be gaining Fortify. The Fortify is going to be converted to Barrier, but we'll talk about that in just a little while. For the affixes here, now this is slowly transitioning into an endgame build, so you do want to start looking for things like Strength, Maximum Life, and I needed resistances, so I went with something that I found that had resistances on. That was the most important thing for me. I wanted to make sure I got 2 cap, and I'll have all of those caps in the planner so you can look through and you can see what the caps are that you're going to need. For the tempers here, the Ground Stomp cooldown reduction is going to be super important. The more that we can get Ground Stomp to be off of cooldown, the more that we can get Call of the Ancients to be off of cooldown. I actually wanted Earthquake's increase size here, so that's what you want to look for. Is going to be your Earthquake increase size and your Ground Stomp cooldown. For the gloves, we're going to be running Executioner. Even though this got capped, it still is a huge increase to your damage, so it's very important that you find this, throw it on the gloves. For the affixes here, max life, strength, attack speed, critical strike chance is all going to be very important. I would highly suggest looking for some critical strike chance, especially early on, because you do need it in the very early stages. Damage to close is going to help play into your Paragon board, so you want to run damage to close, and then your Earthquake size. For the pants, Ariad's Bearing, this is what I'm going to be running. Now, we'll have in the planner the option if you don't have Ariad's Bearing. Something to note, you can only have 75% cooldown reduction for a single skill. So if you have more than that, then you won't get any benefit from it. So going any more into this cooldown reduction here is actually going to be incredibly useless. So make sure that you look at where your stats are, and you can test this out by taking things off and putting it back on. If you have something like Vehement Sprawler, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, that will reduce the cooldown even further. But for the pair of pants, you want to just get a couple masterworkings into it, but you don't need to max this out. So I'll have the masterworking crits inside of the planner as well. For the boots here, I needed more resistances, so I found Yen's Blessing. This was actually not a bad option for me because it will auto-cast some stuff, but this is definitely not for the Lunging Flamequake build the most optimal boots, but if you need the resistances, finding a piece of unique like this is always a great option for you until you get your character fully set up. For the weapon, we're going to be running Earthquakes. This is going to give you increased damage while you're standing in an earthquake and for 4 seconds after. Then it also gives your earthquakes an increased damage. It's very, very great. For your affixes here, you're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike damage. And then for your tempers, we're going to be going with Damage while Berserking to make sure that we hit our Paragon nodes. And then we're also going to be going with Heavy Hitter. That's how we had so many ranks inside of the skill tree. For the other dual wield weapon, we're going to be running Elements here. Every 7 seconds, this is going to give us a 30% increased damage. Affixes are going to be the same. You want to run Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike damage. I have Vulnerable damage on here. That's perfectly fine as well. They're all just additive numbers, but Critical strike damage will be the highest. And then for the tempers, the damage to close is going to also play into our board. And when we get into the Paragon board, I'll talk about when to start taking off the damage to close and putting on critical strike damage. For the other temper, we're going to be running Heavy Hitter. And then we're going to be running Vehemence Brawler. This is what I was talking about to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate. When you hit that cap of 75% on a skill, you can actually continue to lower the cooldown as long as you add more ranks. Vehemence Brawler will give us increased damage whenever we use our ultimate skill, and then all the time, we'll have an additional 2 ranks to that ultimate. That will continue to reduce your cooldown to the absolute lowest that it possibly can be. Your affixes are going to be the same: Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage. I found another one with Vulnerable Damage as a GA, so we're just wearing whatever we found so far. Then for your tempers, we're going to be running Damage while Berserking, as well as Heavy Hitter. For the slashing weapon, we're going to be running Incendiary Fissures. This is where running the Ugly Bastard Helmet really gives you a ton of damage. This is going to take your Earthquakes, multiply it by a huge amount, and then convert it into fire damage, which is going to go straight through that fire multiplier that's going to be on your Ugly Bastard Helmet. We're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Critical Strike Damage if you can get it on this weapon. I have to go re-roll mine. And then for your tempers, we're going to be running Damage versus Close, and then Chance to cast Earthquakes twice. Now this is where it's going to change up from the other two-handed weapon. The other one is going to be running Heavy Hitter. This one is going to be running Chance to cast Earthquakes twice. That's where you want to put all of your master working as well, if you can, when we get further into the season. For the ring, we're going to be running Bold Chieftain. This is going to make it so that when you use a shout, it's going to reduce the cooldown by a massive amount as long as there's enemies nearby. You can basically have the effects of your shout up 100% of the time. For the affixes here, now this is where I got really lucky, and this is where the Oval Vendor came in for me. You're going to look for a GA on Chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. The reason is, if we can do that, we can drop your rune combination of the Kurket. Kurket is going to summon wolves. That's going to make enemies vulnerable. We'll talk about that in a little while, exactly where to go, what to do with the runes. But if you can find this, you can drop that rune combination and do additional damage. So you're looking for your affixes here to be at least Chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And if it can be a GA, that's going to be even better. Just more vulnerable damage up all the time. Then for the other ones, we're going to be running, depending on your character, either Max Life or Strength, and then you want to get some attack speed or critical strike chance. Follow along with the planner to make sure you get all of the affixes in the right spot. For the tempers here, we're going to be running Warcry cooldown reduction and then Damage while Berserking. Now, depending on where your area it's bearing is, if you have a GA here and you do have the 75% cooldown, then you don't have to run anything in your rings. I changed some pieces and I actually don't have the 75% cooldown reduction for my Call of the Ancients. So one of the tempers on your ring should be Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction. Now, I'm going to have that in the planner so you can just follow along, and then your character will be set up a lot better than mine is. For the other temper, we're going to be running Damage while Berserking. The other aspect we're going to be running is going to be Conceited. Because we're going to have a barrier up all the time, this is going to give us some increased damage. For the affixes here, we're going to be running Max Life, Critical Strike Chance, and then if you can get some Strength on here, that's going to be optimal. For the tempers, we're going to be running Brawling cooldown reduction and then some critical strike damage here. For the amulet, we're going to be running Bulkathos. I know that this is a great place to put an offensive amulet, but there's only 2 spaces. We have Bulkathos can either go on your amulet or on your chest piece, and we need to have Steadfast Berserker in order to make this much more tanky so that we can stay alive in the higher torment tiers. So we're going to be running Bulkathos here because when you're standing inside of an earthquake, that's going to give you 30% damage reduction. And that lasts for 4 seconds after you leave that earthquake as well. So it's going to be very important here. For the affixes here, the Strength, Max Life, the Armor percent, you can actually figure that out. If you don't need it on, then you can take that off. If you're capped on your resistances, you can take out some of the diamonds, you can put in some skulls. Figure out where your character is going to be in order to get yourself set up the best. For the tempers here, I went with movement speed, and then I also went with damage to close. This is a great place to either add in the Call of the Ancients cooldown or movement speed if that's something that is important to you. For your Paragon board, in the starter board, we're going to be running Martial. What that's going to do is that every time that you use a shout, it's going to reduce the cooldowns of all of your other non-shout abilities by 2 seconds. All of your non-shout abilities is going to be your Call of the Ancients, and it's also going to be your Ground Stomp. We're running 3 shouts. That means that it's going to be able to reduce by 6 seconds for our shouts. We're also going to be running Bold Chieftain, so our shouts are going to come up more often. For the next board, we're going to be running Weapon Master. This is going to give us increased damage to healthy and injured enemies. Then we're going to be running Ire. Ire is going to give us damage while berserking bonus. That's going to play into one of the other boards later on. Then we're going to be running Decimator. Whenever we deal damage to a vulnerable enemy, we're going to gain 20% increased damage. Whenever we overpower, we gain an additional 20% on top of that. Lunging Strike and Ground Stomp can overpower, so we're always going to be dealing damage to vulnerable enemies and get that 40% there. Then we're going to be running Challenger. This is going to take all of our normal nodes, and then it's going to make them multiply by whatever level your glyph is, so it gives us more strength, which is super important for the Executioner aspect. We're also going to get some additional damage to elite monsters on top of that. This is where your damage while berserking bonus plays in. Now, as you can see, I'm actually under here. I should be at 45% increased damage. It takes 10% of your damage while berserking bonus, and then gives you that to you as a multiplier. You need 450 damage while berserking. Once you hit that, you can start moving around your affixes and your skill points, depending on what you need, in order to make sure that you stay just at about that 450%. Then, for your glyph, we're going to be running Rumble. Rumble is going to give you pretty big multipliers to your Earthquake, and it's also going to give you up to 15% increased damage depending on the amount of Earthquakes that you have out. For the final board here, we're going to be running a Force of Nature. This is going to take 40% of your damage versus close bonus and convert that into a multiplier. Up to 200%, we've hit that cap. Now I can start taking off some of the affixes on my damage versus close as long as I'm over 500% damage versus close. Inside of this, we're going to be running Revenge. That's why we're taking the Outburst and the Tough as Nail combination. Whenever an enemy damages us and they get Thorns damaged, they're going to take increased damage from us. Outburst is going to give you that Thorns. That's going to be how we activate this glyph here. This is also going to take your rare nodes, which is going to be your yellow ones, and it's also going to give them a multiplier. That's how we're getting all of this damage to close and the increased damage to strength. It's a really great option to put into this specific board. So that's your Paragon board. Let's take a look at the way that we're going to set up our runes. Now, for the gems, that's going to be completely up to your character. If you need more resistances, put in diamonds. If you need more armor, put in skulls. For the armor, we're going to be running rubies. That's going to give us increased damage. It's really, really strong to go into the armor, so make sure that when you put your runes in, you put them in your weapons. Don't ever put them into your armor. I know that seeing something like critical strike damage inside of your weapons feels like it's going to be very strong, but you actually will do a lot less damage by putting the critical strike damage in your weapons and putting the runes inside of your armor. For the weapons, we're also going to be putting critical strike damage in the one-handed weapon, so you can do that. For your rune combination, we're going to be running Cur and then Cax. This is going to give you increased damage every single time that it gets activated. It's going to spend all your resources. The great thing about that is that we have a generator for resources. We don't have to worry about resource management, so spending all of our resources doesn't matter. If you do not have this affix here that makes enemies vulnerable, what you're going to do is you're going to keep on your Keh rune. This is going to give you wolves. The wolves are going to give you the vulnerable damage that you need. For the other setup that you're going to be running is Mani and Tech. This is absolutely 100% key to this build working. You cannot run it without this combination here. With Mani, every 2 casts of a mobility skill, which is going to be Lunging Strike, you're going to spawn those earthquakes. This will not work. You will not get earthquakes out if you don't have this combination. So before you decide to swap to this build, make sure that you have this set up. For your boss powers, now I know everybody's favorite boss power to run is going to be Ashava's. We're not going to be running that because of the way that we have Lunging Strike set up. Lunging Strike does not generate any bleed. We're going to be using the rune that gives you Berserking. So what we're going to be doing for our very first boss power is we're going to be running Lord Zier's Blood Pool. After you damage an enemy, it's going to spawn a pool of blood. It's going to do damage over time that's considered bleed. If you don't have any of these boss powers, you can always go back to any one that is in the previous variants of this planner, and you can use all of those. Harbinger's Hatred of Volley. When you cast a basic skill at maximum resources, it's going to spend all of your resources and make all the enemies vulnerable around you. That's really, really great, very strong. It also adds a big multiplier to vulnerable damage every time that you activate your main boss power. We're going to be running Hatred's Embraces Haste. The reason we're running this is a great source of critical strike chance. It goes based on your shadow resistances. Then we're going to be running Blackmailer Sabotage. This is the reason that we're running the Steadfast Berserker. Whenever we gain Fortify, we're going to gain a % of that Fortify as our barrier. That allows us to maintain a barrier pretty much all the time, and it makes us incredibly tanky. If you're going to be running a hardcore character, that is going to be the boss power that you're going to want to run, and run it with Steadfast Berserker. For your Barbarian expertise, we're going to be running the Two-Handed Axe. Now, a really quick tip for anybody that has not done this yet, if you want to level up any of your expertise, You go down to normal difficulty, you come into the bosses, you get multiple training dummies, you put Whirlwind on, you put whatever weapon on that you want to level up, and then you just hit the dummies and it levels up super fast. You'll get 1 to 10 in about 10 seconds. It's very, very quick. It's very easy. So just a quick tip for everybody that has not seen that yet. For the way that the expertise works, you do not actually have to be running a two-handed axe to take advantage of this. This is just going to give us a straight 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. And finally, for your mercenaries, we're going to be running Subo. This is going to give us our map hack, and it's also going to give us a movement speed as well as a 25% increased damage here. And for your opportunity, we're going to be running Rahir. This is just for a little bit of defenses. When you have Bastion on here, whenever that procs every 25 seconds, you're going to take 90% less damage. It's incredibly strong. You can run Variana if you want for some additional attack speed if you feel tanky enough. For your gameplay loop, it is incredibly simple. All you're going to do is just use your Lunging Strike. That's it. You use Lunging Strike. Now, when you use your Call of the Ancients, use that first. Then you're going to ground stomp. That's going to reduce the cooldown. As you can see, it's right back up again. Then we can start using our shouts, and you watch ground stomps back off cooldown. Call of the Ancients is off cooldown. We used it all again. That is how you're going to be using this ability and this spec here. It's very, very strong. It's very easy, and it is a lot of fun to put together. No resource management whatsoever. Get out there, hit some hits, hit some bosses. Let me know what you think of the build in the comments. I'm super excited to see what everybody thinks of it. I'm live every night. I would love it if you stopped by, said hi, theory crafted with me. Catch you on the flip side.